recording.
And
this can be sent around to everybody afterwards as well. So welcome everybody this evening for this interview preparation training from Jemma at Education Hotel. I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, Jemma. But just to say, my name's Kavin, and I'm a dad of a couple of kids. For those of you early on the call, you'd have seen one of them scurrying around here after his bath time. He was trying to grab something from the shelves on my right-hand side. Anyway, I'm just listening. Yeah, that's quiet now. I think the kids are downstairs, so we shouldn't be interrupted. Anyway, I'm a dad of 2 kids. I'm also the founder of KidCoachApp, which is an app to help all of us parents have more meaningful conversations with our kids, which in so doing helps build the skills they need. And it just so happens that it's pretty cool for interview preparation. Lots of tricky questions in there with also coaching prompts to help you guide their thinking and development as you're practicing some of this stuff at home, in between any tutoring or masterclasses, right, that you might be going to, Jemma.
Yes. So I'm Jemma. I run a tuition agency called the Education Hotel, and I also run a education consultancy called Top School and Uni. I've known Kavin. We've known each other for over a year now, because last year we did a Facebook Live together where we talked through things that could go wrong in interviews. So I'm really happy to be back doing a slightly different format this time. And again, looking at 11 plus and 13 plus interviews. I've been a tutor for over 10 years, and I support students to get into top schools and universities as well. But with the schools, things on academic scholarships as well as standard entrance. So interview skills is something that I do quite a lot, especially around this time. It seems to be starting earlier and earlier each year, but I like to come on and to offer some value, and generally, as I said before, I like working with Kavin because I believe in the product that you've got. I think it's really useful for parents to be able to help prepare their children for interviews.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Jemma. The one that we did last year was really fun. I'll repost it a little later in the Facebook group that we have for interview preparation. But if you remember me in a baseball cap, then you're thinking of the right session. I got to sort of play a cheeky 10-year-old who kept saying the wrong thing when my baseball cap was on, at least. So that was fun. I actually quite enjoyed that. I'll repost it at some point. But this is your session mainly, Jemma. I'm just sort of hosting a little bit from our Facebook group, which is Prepare Kids for 11 Plus Interview. Some of you are joining from that. If you aren't, then feel free to go check that group out. So over to you, Jemma. The only thing I'll say is the chat box is very much open. Your videos are off and you've been muted, just so that we can maintain the quality and without any sort of random background noise and things like that. But the chat box is very much open, and we really do encourage you to use it. Little trick. There's a little kind of drop-down toggle in the box, and you can choose to send messages to everyone or just the hosts and panelists. If you send it to just the hosts and panelists, only Jemma and I will see that. That's fine. But it sometimes helps for everybody to see what everybody else is saying and contributing, because then we can all feed off each other, right? So if you wanted to just toggle down to everyone and send any chats, comments that way, that would be awesome. Super. Shall I start presenting your slides?
Please, that would be great.
Here we
So for, again, any of you who joined us slightly earlier, I've had a slight tech issue with being able to share the slides. So Kavin's going to share them for me.
Awesome. So I'm going to leave it like this so I can also keep the monitoring the chat box.
That's fine.
Wherever it's gone. You can see that, right? All on your screen? All good?
Yeah, we can see. Definitely.
Right. Okay. So I will proceed.
On the next slide. Okay. So as I said, we've done introductions mostly, but I typically run these interview sessions really anything from now until January, because I know that there are a number of you who are hitting interview season. Interview season is either before or after 11 plus and 13 plus exams. So it's here to give you a bit of an insight, a bit of information about what might be involved in interviews, why they might be happening. And also what we're going to do today is go through some typical types of questions so that you can start to think about them with your children. Next slide, please.
One second, might be a lag. There we go.
Hey, there we are. Perfect. So the only thing I can start with, the only thing that seems right, is to start with really what an interview is about. And interviews aren't a test. I think a lot of people come into this thinking that they are. Really, it is a conversation, and it should be a forward and back conversation to make sure that your child would be the right fit for the school, but also for your child to make sure that they would feel comfortable going to that school. It's a chance for an interviewer to find out a little bit more about a child's personality and how they react to new situations, how they might react in group situations, especially if they're boarding, and how it might be to teach them. Ultimately, you can only tell so much from an exam. And actually, what's slightly happening in terms of trends is we're almost seeing schools put some interviews before exams even, because they want to get a bit more of a holistic picture about a child. That means that there is no right and no wrong answer for an interview. And that's one of the big things that I think is really important to say at the start, is that there is no perfect interview answer. It's really individual, and it's really about your child and being able to communicate with new adults. They're going to have adults that they've not met in the interview session, and for them to be able to communicate clearly and with passion. Next slide, please.
It's coming. I promise you it's coming.
That's fine.
There we go.
Okay. So when we're looking at interviews, you might be joining us and you might say, okay, well, I'm looking at this, but I don't need to worry. My interview is all the way in January or December. And that might be the case. But if your child is struggling to speak with new people, maybe they're quite shy, maybe they're a bit reticent with strangers, especially if we've had lockdown, and that means they haven't seen a lot of new adults often. We know that there's been a big break in education. If your child struggles with speaking to new people, then do try and start getting them familiar with that from an early point. It takes the stress out of it, and it makes it into a bit more of a fun process. And I think both Kavin and I would agree that interviews can be fun, especially some of the questions on KidCoachApp. But not if you are really worried about speaking to unfamiliar adults and it's something that causes a lot of panic. So if you are looking at this and you've got months to go, then do try and start that kind of process a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think if I could just quickly add, I think what can be fun about interview and interview preparation is that it's kind of natural, right? It's just talking to somebody. And yes, thinking about some challenging things that maybe you hadn't thought about before, but that equally can be fun. I know when I test the questions in KidCoachApp on children, some of your children, just looking at the names in this chat, and they always say to me afterwards, that was so great. I got to use my brain. I enjoy giving my opinion. You know, it can be fun. So maybe a nice change of pace, right? From the crazy stressful exams that have essentially just been done. You know, there's an opportunity to make it fun, as long as we're not, preparing the night before the exam.
Yeah, and also it's a chance for parents to find out a little bit more about their children. Some of those questions, when I go through them with my students, I find out things that I didn't know and opinions that I didn't know. And that's what the art of conversation really is. It's about being able to find out more about the other person.
Right.
If you're looking a few weeks,
sorry.
Can we go back? There we are. If you're looking a few weeks before, and again, you might be watching this on recording, or it might be that it's in the group that Kavin mentioned earlier, or you might have interviews in a few weeks' time. The types of practice that you're wanting to do is making sure that your child has thought about the interview questions that I'm going to go through, and that they are happy to sit in front of an adult, that they make eye contact, that they give the right nonverbal cues. So they're not looking down at their feet, they are sitting up straight, that they aren't fiddling all the time. Those are the types of things that you can work on, which is more about the communication style than it is about answers. Other things that you can be doing is kind of reminding them of why it is that you're interested in that school, of their achievements, of things that they have done. Night before, it's all about what's going to happen the next day. I would never, and this is for overall interview, I would never recommend a scripted interview because children sound like robots. I think I've written that later in the slides. But it's something where familiarity is useful, but not to the point of scripting. So the night before would be something that, you know, sometimes schools ask you to bring something that you're proud of. So maybe get that ready. I prefer a student to wear a school uniform. It's formal, but it's also comfortable, usually. Maybe watch the school YouTube so that they don't feel intimidated when they walk in, especially as we're doing it live this year. Or we should be doing it live this year. Ultimately, being familiar with the school and having watched the school's prospective video the night before can help them feel like, oh, I know what I'm doing here. And you don't have those additional worries on top of interviews. And then the day of, it's all about passion, confidence, and those kind of non-verbal cues. Now we can go to the next one.
Awesome.
So here we are. The common areas of struggle. And I think this is really where the KidCoachApp kind of comes into its own, because the type of student that I see right at the start of an interview preparation will often give a one-word answer. So what would you normally be doing in school? Math. And as an interviewer, that's really hard because you're suddenly trying to get some information out. You're really working to get that. It's not a conversation. And as I said at the start, an interview is all about conversation. So do try and think about how to move it from one-word answers to multiple answers. And I know that, Kavin, you've got a load of prompts that sit within KidCoachApp to help move those answers along from something that is ultimately quite short to a bigger piece.
Right. Especially with the yes/no kind of questions. So slightly wacky one, but would chocolate rain be a good or a bad thing? Okay, would chocolate rain be a good or a bad thing? Which is a fun question, but also you have to think about, is it good? Is it bad? Why? And so children maybe could say, yes, it's good, or yes, it's bad, full stop, right? That's the one-word answer. But then you want to move them beyond that, obviously, right? And in an interview setting, you want them to be able to express both sides of it. So there are some coaching prompts within the app, as an example, which might say, well, why do you think it might be good? Why do you think it might be bad? But then to also help you put yourselves in other people's shoes to develop different perspectives, if you're struggling, you can ask things like, well, what would your brother say? What would your teacher say? What would a Cadbury's bar of chocolate say to this, right? What would the weatherman say to this? You know, all those sorts of perspective taking type prompts as well to help you think about more things to say. Because I think in my experience, like children, they kind of want to say more, but they perhaps don't know where to go with it. And so if they're asked, what's your favorite subject? Maths, but I don't know what else to say. Would chocolate rain be good? Yes, but they don't know what else to say. Like helping them think in more directions unlocks their tongue, right? They have the thoughts in there. It's just about channeling that out of them. And that's something that through interview preparation and maybe by using the KidCoachApp can help with.
Exactly. And it is all about stories, and ultimately interviews are about stories and about getting to connect with people. Other things to watch out for, are sounding like a robot. And that is because you've overlearned an answer. I would like to go to this school because I looked at the history of it and I saw this, and then I did the, you start sounding like a robot. And it's for an interviewer, and having done these interviews for 10 years now, it's an automatic sign that I need to ask a harder question or a more unusual question, one you haven't prepared for, so that I can actually have a conversation. And that robot sounding is something I come across a lot when I'm doing interview prep. And really what we're doing is we're trying to familiarize with the idea of interviews, but we're not trying to make you learn a script, or your child to learn a script. And other things like rushing your speech, often, again, by simply having that conversation and doing that practice, you learn to slow your speech down. And obviously when we're excited or we're nervous, we speed up, and you can get sometimes the tripping over of words, and it can sound quite hard to listen to. So common area of struggle is rushing your speech. That not being able to think of an answer. As Kavin said, you might not know, as a student, you might not know how to explain why it is that you enjoy math. Or I had a student the other day who had recently taken up a prefect position and didn't know how to explain what they were doing as a prefect because they hadn't done anything. And he didn't want to bring it up in the interview. I said, what positions of responsibility, if you had any? And he didn't know how to say anything. He said, I don't want to say anything. And it's because he didn't know what to bring up. And so by being able to think around the question, what did prefects do last year? What might you look forward to doing? What is it that typically they do on open days? Those types of things are those invisible questions, the parts that sit underneath the actual question. We've talked a little bit about body language. If you are a parent listening to this, just be aware that there may be a tour, there may be parent interviews. It's parent chat, that's all it is. But they are looking, the school is often looking to make sure that a parent is engaged and is behind their child and supportive. But behaviour will be often looked at during a tour. So even if you've left the interview, do make sure that best behaviour is on. Also, one thing that I typically come up against is assuming that the interviewer knows something is specific. So if you're answering a question and you say, yes, I'm the waste warden for my school. I don't know what that is. That's really specific to your school. And a lot of people
doesn't sound like a great role either, does it? Waste warden.
I'm thinking more recycling, that kind of. But I don't know what that is. So therefore, you have to explain it to me. If you've got a specific thing that your school says, maybe you're in elephant class. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that means. So you're going to need to tell an interviewer. And then the last thing is really about pulling off the line between confident and passionate and not braggy. The worst type of student that you will get in it, especially in a group interview, is one who thinks they know everything. And I interview for Oxbridge as well as interviewing, doing practice interviews for the 11 plus and 13 plus, and you get it in both. So we want you to be confident. We want you to be proud of your achievements because they are something to be proud of. But what we want to avoid is somebody who goes into an interview and says, I'm the best person at football. I am the best in my year, the best in my school. I've won all the trophies and I'm going to be on the first team, because that's the wrong side of confidence. All right, we can move to the next slide, please. So I think there's probably about 12 different types of interview question. Not all of them are asked in all interviews, but what I wanted to do was to go through the 5 most common. And what Kavin and I have done is also take a couple of questions from the KidCoach app and use them to really showcase some of the categories that come up, and ultimately how you can do that preparation at home.
Yeah, and this category thinking is really, really helpful. And until Gemma mentioned it, not something that I had actively thought of myself, to be honest, right? That there are just different types of questions that exist in the world that you get at a dinner party, and indeed that you get asked at interviews. And it's helpful to break it down in that, right? So today, Gemma only has time to go through 5 of the 12, but you cover all 12 in your follow-on training, right? Your masterclass and such. So, we can't go through everything right now. This is just to give you a quick taste. But, have you heard that phrase, to eat an elephant, take a bite at a time, right? But when trying to deal with something that is potentially quite wide-ranging and quite complex, whereas lots of different sort of parts to it, just take it apart bit by bit. And so this category thinking, I think, is a helpful way to make everything more digestible. So there'll be example questions, and I encourage folks to use the chat box as we go through the next few slides. So maybe Gemma is kind of offering a question, and if you're a parent, you might want to ask a child. If you're the child who's directly on here, great. Type in your responses. Yeah, let's we can get some interactivity going on the next few slides. Probably, we're always really eager to hear what you say, and if we see what you say, probably, right, Gemma, we could offer some suggestions on like that was what's good about that, or how could you improve, or what you might ask as a follow-up to that to elongate the conversation and so on.
Exactly. As we said, it's all conversational.
Right.
So yeah, as I said, these questions that we're going to be bringing up, Kavin has briefly mentioned it, but I'm running a masterclass, which is this Saturday coming. So when I started talking to Kavin about this, I said, we've definitely got to do the categories, and that's really where this came from. I will give some more information about the masterclass at the end, but ultimately this is where it's come from. So the first type of question is the types about hobbies, extracurricular activities. And the thing that I would like parents and children to do is to take time thinking about your extracurriculars and really talking about them over the dinner table. Why did you enjoy them? Why did you start them? What were you looking for when you started it? Is it that you're really good at the sport? Is it that actually it was something you didn't want to do originally and now you really like it? Have you achieved anything in that you are proud of? It doesn't have to be a certificate. It doesn't have to be anything that you've won. It could just be that you are proud that when you started, you couldn't do it, or you couldn't master this skill, and now you have. So really, what are you proud about it? And then to think about whether you work alone doing it, or do you work as part of a team? Are you part of a partnership? And some of the things that often come up in questions would be about, and Kavin's put a perfect one down there, about being, say, if you were a captain, what would you say before a good game? And if you could say, well, actually, I play football, or I play hockey, and this is something I found useful that my coach has said, then again, it's bringing it back to you. So what sorts of extracurriculars do you have? Pop them in the chat, and why did you start them? What are you proud of about them? Those are the types of things we want to start thinking about. There's maybe ones that you're more proud than others. There's maybe ones that you enjoy more than others. And don't just think about the last couple of months, because you might have been doing 11 plus preparation at that point. So think a little bit further back. And also, we've had lockdowns. So is there certain things that you used to do, maybe did brownies or guides, and actually now you haven't been able to do it for a point, but you definitely could do it, and it is something that you have done. So let's have a think about those. Perfect.
There's some nice examples coming in the chat. Football and badminton and cricket, basketball. One interesting question from Anthony, Gemma, about should we be pointing out negative points or stick to purely positive things?
So I have a slide a little bit later on this. If you are looking at things that you have improved on, it's more about language. So I would never say, And typically this comes out when we're talking about schools. But I would never say I started swimming and my swim coach was really bad, but then I moved swim clubs. Instead, I would say I started swimming and I moved swim clubs so that I could challenge myself, or so that I could find a more nurturing environment. So I would always present it in a positive language as opposed to negative language. And the same thing for subjects and school and those types of things. Always think of the positives. There will be points where someone might ask a negative question. And obviously you've got to answer that. But overall, I'd prefer a positive language. Okay. Oh, we've got some great things in here. So people whose friends have encouraged them to join sports. Nice. Someone who started chess, originally wasn't very good at it, but has worked really hard to improve at it and has won their last chess tournament. And that would be something that would be great, because I could then have a conversation. I don't know chess that much. I only started playing probably about a year ago in lockdown, and I could have a great conversation about maybe your favorite moves, about the ways that you have improved. I could talk about whether it's better to play someone who's better than you, or is it better to play someone who's worse than you? I could ask so many questions around that.
That's a great question, Gemma, that last one. I'm going to steal that for the Kid Coach app. When
It's
playing
like
anything. Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? I often think that I ask myself that because, I don't know, for me, it's about a stretch challenge. I feel like I should be in the top 30%. I always think when I'm on the football pitch or whatever, because you want people there better than you, but equally it's tough if you're literally the worst person there. It's hard for motivation.
But you've got to be able to learn off of somebody. So I think
exactly. With that chess one as well, I like the balance of, because it's sort of confident and humble, but also achievement orientated without being braggy, you know. So I played chess. I wasn't very good at it, but I worked hard because I wanted to get better, and I did get better. I won the last chess tournament. It feels like it walks that confident, arrogant line fairly well, because that is a hard line to walk.
It is, especially in sport, because ultimately sport is competitive, so we all want to do well within it. And I can see that we've got a couple of quite high up players. And I remember when I did 11 plus, I was a national swimmer. So I remember kind of going into interviews with the same idea. And it was really about highlighting maybe somewhere where you've worked on a skill. So if you play professionally or county level or national level, think about how you've got there, and really it shows a lot about the time that you've spent doing it, because you've had to spend a lot of time perfecting that skill. And if that is something that you've chosen to do for that reason, but other people do it because it's I can see here, because of friends, and they really enjoy playing with friends, and that's another really great reason that you'd start sport. So again, different stories, but it might be the same sport that you're doing.
What if it's, Gemma, because mum or dad makes me do it, as I see one comment in the chat?
I would think about what you enjoy from it. So I would, again, mum and dad makes me do it is a negative thing. I would focus on the things that you have gained from it. So if you started it originally because mum and dad suggested it, but then you found a part of it that you enjoyed, that would be what I'd be focusing on. So I started rugby because my dad said it was worthwhile doing, or my dad wanted me to get exercise. But now I find that I really enjoy it because of this, or I really enjoy this part of it. So I would always think about it in terms of that positive thing that you take away from it.
Great stuff. Looks like we have some very active children and families on this call. Amazing. Oh, Gemma, have you frozen? Have I frozen?
No, you're back.
There we go. All good.
Perfect. Can we look at the next slide?
Go to the next one. Yeah.
Okay. One of the key things, or one of the useful things to keep in your mind, is about school values. So every school has its set of values, and it will be on their website. It will be in their logo. It will be something that they talk about often during their open evenings. And you'll tend to find that it's usually quite aspirational. And sometimes it's useful to think about how your extracurriculars, whether they be music, sport, dance, drama, whatever they are, maybe demonstrate some of their values. And I wouldn't go outright and say, I have demonstrated this value by doing this. Again, it sounds a bit robotic. Instead, I just think about, are there points that you can think of when you have shown resilience? Because that's a fairly common one from school values. And that would be something that you might prepare for, because they may well ask a question about it, or they may well want to know, when you tell them this is the sport that you do and this is the reason that you started it and here's the thing that you enjoy out of it, they might say, oh, has there been a time where it hasn't gone to plan, and how have you picked yourself back up? And what they're wanting to do is to see, well, do you demonstrate the values that the school has? So really those things are worth having in the back of your mind. They're not something that you'd want to say out loud. So you wouldn't want to say, I mimic the school value of, and you really wouldn't want to mention the values necessarily by name, but it is something that you might think about when you're having those thoughts of really what you've done in detail with those extracurriculars.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we've got school-specific questions, and I know somebody has asked, here we are, how to answer the question of what other schools you're applying to. I will deal with that one after I've been through this ones. So this is a selection of school-specific questions. As I said, I've taken them from the masterclass that I'm doing this weekend. Some of them most of them are school-based. And the one that you are almost always going to get is, tell me why you want to come to our school. That's the one that you want to find something where you can link yourself to the school. Ideally, it's something that you have found yourself. So your child has found themselves, as opposed to it's at the top of the league tables, or mum and dad wanted me to go. Yes. So have a look at, I always say, go to the school videos and find, and the websites as well, and find something that you would enjoy going there. If you've been to an open day, think about the people you met on the open day. And those types of stories are often nicer to tell about why you want to come to the school. So do they do, I know that there's a couple of schools that do kayaking as a sport. It's amazing. That would make me want to go to a school, much more than a league table. So pick on the things that you enjoy. So if you do Stagecoach and you are really into drama and dance, if they have a drama studio, that's going to be something that you would enjoy doing if you were to go to the school. And so if you say to them, well, on the open day, I saw your drama studio and I really like doing drama. I do Stagecoach and it's something that I would like to do here. Then again, what you're doing is you're showing them that you see yourself in that school.
Something specific is going to be a bit more memorable, I'm guessing, in the mind of the interviewer, right? So if they say
yes,
it's
I think it comes with the warming.
But not to make it so super niche. I like that you serve burgers on Tuesdays. Like you don't want it to be like that niche. But I liken it to the grown-up land, right? We're all grown-ups and we have jobs, and no doubt we've been interviewer or interviewee a few times, right? And there's always that standard question of why do you want this role, or why do you want to come work for XYZ? And why do you want to come work for Google? Because you're a big company, you do cool tech stuff. Like it's not going to be as interesting, is it, for a Google interviewer as as a tale that's a bit more specific and a bit more memorable, without talking about what they serve in the canteen on Tuesdays and the funky kind of slides to get down there, or whatever Google has.
Yeah, you don't want to go too specific. Again, recently I've had a student who tried to tell me the whole history of the school when I asked why they wanted to come, which, whilst interesting, it was a bit unusual. It was a bit too specific, because also it was clear that it was something they'd over prepared. So it wasn't something that they've grown up looking at the history of the school, or that they're really interested in history. It was that they had picked it specifically to answer this question, and it was really obvious. So that's why I'd say stay away from the really niche, but something that actually you enjoy. Ultimately, if it comes from you as a student, or your child, then it's more likely to be interesting, and it's something you can form a conversation. The problem with really specific stuff is that someone might well answer and ask about, oh, okay, you told me the whole history of the school. Tell me which headmistress was most ask a really specific question. You don't want to go there because you don't really know it. Don't prepare something for the sake of preparing it. Link it to yourself is a lot easier. The other one that I'm going to cover, because somebody's asked about it, is how to answer the questions about what other schools you're applying for. With that, I would always say I've applied for other schools, because ultimately you have, and they know that. There's not one person who has applied for one school. If you have, you've put all your eggs into one basket, and that's slightly more unusual. But what I would do is, again, go for the positive. Why would this school be an ideal fit? So yes, I've applied to other schools. However, this is the top choice for me because, or I would really like to come to this school because, and that is where I would always put my emphasis. They should not ask you the names of the schools that you've applied to, because that's a bit nosy. If they do, again, I wouldn't lie. I would tell them, but I would always emphasize why that school is your top choice. So by saying, the reasons that you've thought about, then those would be the reasons. As someone who said, if you are an all through school, that would be the only time that you would apply to maybe one, because there are schools that go all the way through. But ultimately, if you're looking at this from a 11 plus perspective, and your school finishes in year 6, you're going to be applying to multiple schools.
Even if it really isn't your top choice, because you always want to keep it positive, don't you? But if it truly is your, I don't know, 3rd, 4th backup choice,
I would like to go to this school because this school is one I'd love to attend, because I'd always keep it positive. Yeah. So regardless of ultimately where it is, there will be reasons that you would like to attend it. And so there's reasons as to why you want to go. And I would always push that. I would never advise lying in an interview, because from a kind of an adult looking into a student's perspective, it's often very obvious when a child is lying, and it causes a lot of stress. So I would never say this is my top choice if you feel like it's not your top choice. For many people, they've got several top choices. So it's not wrong to say that's your top choice, because there are top choices. But you might say this feels like the school for me because, or I would really enjoy going to this school because. Those are the things.
Yeah, we can have many best friends, can't we? So we can also have many top choices of schools. And I think an overarching message that's coming out in several of these kind of excellent points, Jemma, is around just keeping it positive, right? If you come across as somebody who's always positive and optimistic and enthusiastic, and you're accentuating those parts of why this school is appealing to you, then that is going to come across well. as long as what you're saying is genuine, of course, but you will always find genuinely things that you are really excited to talk about and excited about the school about.
And ultimately, that is nicer to talk about than to talk about the negatives. So you are more likely to enjoy a conversation when you are putting forward the positives in something. So yeah, I'd always go for the positives rather than the negatives. Same thing about when they say, tell me about your current school. Often some students will say, okay, well, this is what's wrong with my current school. That isn't necessarily what they're asking. They're asking just to tell you about their current school. Sometimes they will say things like, what would you change if you were headmaster of the school? And that is your opportunity to say things that you might like to improve. But again, from a positive attitude, as opposed to, well, this is really rubbish, so I want to change it. I would always say, this is something I'd really enjoy having, so this is why I'd change it. So again, always about the positives.
Great stuff. Should we go to the next one?
Yes. Okay, this is exactly what I've been talking about, avoiding the negatives. So I feel like this is probably done to the death. Always try and emphasize the positives. Whilst everyone's kind of having a look through that, somebody has asked about formality when you speak. I wouldn't try and put in complex words. I wouldn't try and be overly formal. I would be polite. And in terms of kind of dress, I'd always dress slightly more formally, because you ultimately it's an interview. I wouldn't say dunno or whatever. I would speak properly, but I also don't need to go in saying really complex words. It's not a creative writing. So you don't need to sound anything different to how you normally sound when you are speaking to an adult that you're respecting. So that's where I'd keep it. I wouldn't put in any unusual vernacular just to make it seem unusual, because it is
It'll sound scripted again, won't it?
It's ingenuous. But yeah, it doesn't. It sounds scripted and it sounds robotic and it sounds weird, especially when, again, if you get a student onto a subject that they really enjoy, suddenly all those words disappear and the passion comes out, and suddenly it sounds even weirder because you're now talking about something that you really like doing, and actually all of those formal words have just disappeared. So always as though you're talking, well, you're talking to an adult that you respect. So therefore that would be the level of formality.
Yeah, being yourself and being genuine. There's something really interesting about humans. Like, humans are really good at picking up on when people are authentic and genuine. It's a thing you can't code in, right? You know, with the rise of artificial intelligence and things like that, robots have a hard time telling when humans are genuine or not. But humans, we figure it out much easier. It's just something about the faces, eye contact, the body language, the passion, the intonation. We have this amazing uncanny ability, all of us, to spot somebody who's just really genuine and passionate about what they're talking about. And so just be natural, right? Be your natural self and let that shine through.
That's the other reason I'd say go positive, because you can talk a lot better about things you find positive than things you don't.
Right.
Even if you're the world's best moaner, you will always be able to talk about something that you enjoy much easier than you talk about something you don't enjoy.
Yeah.
So no matter what the question, if you're thinking about positives, you would always want to pick the things that you find positive, because you can talk more about it. So the biology is that question I put up there. I like my biology because my teacher is really friendly, but my physics teacher is really strict. Sorry, I should say strict, not strict. You could probably talk more about the biology than you could about the physics. So why mention that negative point about physics? Instead, if you do want to, maybe you're really interested in physics, but your teacher wasn't great. again, you could say something like, my biology teacher is really friendly and I really like teachers who are encouraging, and I think she's really encouraging. And I would love to do more stuff with physics as well because I'm really interested in this area. So then what you're doing is you're putting forward that positive.
Great. Okay, the next one.
Yep. Tell me an example questions. And we've popped down there one of the questions from KidCoachApp, which is, say you failed your math test, what would you do? Because these are really similar to the tell me an example questions used in interviews. And again, they're things that can be thought about and discussed. They're not going to be the same question that they ask you necessarily, but they are things that can be pre-thought about, but not pre-scripted. I think is probably the emphasis there. So tell me an example when you struggled with something. That could be that math test. If you've had that conversation at home and you talked about something where it's been similar, maybe not a math test, maybe it was a science test or a history test, or maybe you didn't do as well as you thought you would do on a class project. That's something that then you could talk about when you're talking about those tell me example questions. Disagreement and how you solved it, teamwork. There's quite a lot I've seen when I've been going through KidCoachApp that really do help with these tell me an example style questions.
Yeah, that I think you said it really well, right? And I can't remember what you said, but you said it really well. And it's around like organizing your thoughts, right? Not scripting things and having it rote learn, but at least having a chat about it already, having a think about it already. Because coming up with these on the spot is extremely tough. And again, in real life job interviews, they do this all the time, right? Tell me an example where literally these questions, right? They're trying to assess character, but coming up with them on the spot is extremely tough. So if you have a little bank of examples in your head that aren't scripted, just something that you know you struggled with and ideally overcame, something that you had a falling out with somebody and ideally how you came together again, or an example of teamwork or an example of leadership and so on. It just helps to already have had that conversation at home, to have the thoughts organized. I'm going to use that word, organized.
Yeah, it is. It's about being able to organize your thoughts. And I think what I say sometimes to my students is, nobody knows that script except you. So almost why would you still be following it? Because if you've said something at home and maybe you've had this conversation and you said something that you thought was really interesting and you want to bring it up again, but you can't quite remember it, you're going to spend so much energy trying to think about it and trying to remember what it is that you're probably going to forget what people are discussing. Whereas if you can think about the specific example, and that's what you had a discussion about at home, you've already kind of gone through the discussion, you've already had a think about it, but you haven't learned a phrase or you haven't learned a sentence that you need to say, then it's much easier to have that conversation. It's much freer than feeling like you have to put something in and you've got to say this specific phrase because it sounded good last time. Ultimately, it's a conversation. So they're not going to have the same every single time. So really think about the example, but don't over labor the thinking. Don't necessarily plan out what you would say. Write down some ideas if you like to keep a note of it, but I would never write a script for it.
Awesome.
One of the ways that I help students to prepare their answers with this tell me an example is using the STAR technique, which is again a technique that I think quite a lot of people use. It's something that, again, it helps you to organize your thoughts. It's the same. And we would never say it out loud. And also, I would never always stick to it. It's something that just helps me make sure that I've got every single step when I'm presenting an example. So S stands for situation. So what you were doing. So if we take the disagreement one, situation means telling me about your friend. So I've got a friend, her name is Stacey, and she's in the same year as me at school, and we're best friends. There's the situation. T stands for task. So the thing that happened. So Stacey and I were paired together to do a history project, but she wanted to do it on Henry VIII and I wanted to do it on the Victorians. And we couldn't agree what we wanted to do it on. There's the task. A is the action, the thing that you took. So how did you try and resolve it? So we agreed that we would both go away and we would come up with 5 reasons why we should do our topic, and we'd meet the next day. And then R is the result. So when we met, I realized that Henry VIII was the better topic to do, and we ended up doing that. So STAR, you'd never say STAR, you never say situation, task, action, result. But it would be something that would help to organize your thoughts. So just as a kind of a recap, so S for situation, tell me about the overall, like your friend or where you were when you had this thing that you did, maybe leadership, situation. T is for task. So what was the thing that you had to do? So did you fail your math test? Did you have an argument with a friend? A is the action. What did you do to try and resolve it? And R is the result. What happened at the end? And again, it doesn't matter in an interview. If you forget to say the R, it doesn't matter, because ultimately they may well ask you about it. So any interviewer, if you said, these are the things that happened, but you didn't tell me, I'd be wanting to know, oh, so what did you do your presentation on anyway? And then you would be able to fill it in. So a good interviewer will make that an easy conversation, but having the STAR can help you to be able to order your thoughts.
Yeah, and it helps you tell the story, right? And if you forget kind of bits of it, the conversational element of the interview will kick in and the interview will help you, right? So, okay, so what did you do next? Oh, okay, that's a good idea. What happened with that? How did you make amends with your friend or whatever the issue was? So I guess you want to keep it conversational still, right? Even if you have frameworks in your head that you're secretly using.
Yeah, exactly. It's, as I said, it's not a script. It's a way of ordering your thoughts.
Nice.
Okay. All right. So creative and critical thinking. Again, this I think is called the creativity part in the KidCoach app. And these are perfect for the slightly out of the box questions that you have that interviewers can sometimes throw at us. There is no right answer, as I said at the start, especially to these. But there are options, right? You've got loads of things that you could write down. And with this, it's about making sure that your thought is ordered. So this is the stuff where it really becomes kind of conversational. So you might say, and I put the message in the bottle one at the top, if you write a message in the bottle, what are you going to write? And I might
write in the chat as well. Let's get it. It's a good opportunity to get it interactive, right?
That's useful. Yeah, stick it in there. And again, it's a conversation. So you might tell your answer, and then I might ask you why, or I might ask you the further question, which is again down in the KidCoach app: is it littering if you throw it in the sea? If you are asked this question, and sometimes we get all this like, here's all the ideas I've got. Sometimes you get nothing, and it's just like, don't know what I'm thinking. And what I would do is almost, I would explain to them, and I'd say, okay, first thing I often do is say, can you repeat that question? Now, I do that because I am trying to get myself a little more time to be able to think about it, but I also want to sometimes clarify it because they might have said something that I've missed and it seems a confusing question. Always ask if you don't know what they're talking about. Do always ask. The second thing that I would say is if you're struggling to think, and sometimes these questions take a little bit to think about, to either get rid of all of the ideas you've got and pick one, or to open it up and really find an idea. I would always just say to them, oh, can I have a moment just to think about that? Because it's much nicer to say that than to sit there like this. And then you have your answer. And it can be a little bit odd. So I would always say to an interviewer, oh, okay, that's interesting. Can I have a moment just to think about that? They'll always say yes. Then I'll say, no, we need the answer right now. So then you can have a bit of a think. Then you can start to come up with your answer. And I can see there's a couple of interesting answers again. So we've got starting a conversation. That would be interesting. If you start a conversation, how do they know where to send the reply to? That would be probably my next question for that. We've got, right, help me to scare somebody. What if you did need help? Again, a couple of people who are answering the littering question. So I wouldn't do it because it's littering. A huge whale or shark ate it. Just throwing a bottle can cause a lot of damage. Yep, I think I probably would agree. But what about if you were on a desert island and you needed to be rescued and that was the only way out? Would that be something that is it worth throwing that one bottle into the sea? What about if it was something that you were doing and you knew you could, maybe it had a tracker on it and you could pick it up? Is that something you're allowed to do if you know where it is at all points? So again, it's a more conversational type of piece. Just again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's purely for conversation.
Yeah, there's a great prompt, Jemma. I love these types of questions where there is no right or wrong answer. And isn't it so refreshing after the 11 plus exams where there absolutely is a right and a wrong answer that we're striving towards? And this is also a bit more like real life, right? Like life is not black and white. Life is 100 shades of gray in between, and embracing that gray space, as it were, being comfortable with ambiguous concepts where there's multiple opinions and perspectives and thoughts and ideas. That is actually a key life skill that we want all of our children to be developing, and is indeed why they test for that kind of thing at the interview stage with these slightly more wacky, out of the box thinking questions.
Yeah.
This
sometimes it is worth saying, sometimes they do this in groups. So there might be 3 other people in your session, and they might go around and get people's ideas. So you want to have been through that out of the box thinking, because if somebody has said your idea, then you might want to think about something different around it. So that's why I think it's useful to have a think about really how you would structure your answer and how you kind of answer those out of box questions. Because if 2 people have said the same thing in terms of answer, they might ask a different question by the time they get to you. They might ask if you've got any different opinions on it. And that's where you can bring in some of that stuff that you've been thinking about. Whereas if you think about it as purely linear and kind of one answered, then you're almost saying the same as what most people will say, and that isn't necessarily. They're looking for people who might have that more unusual take, and it helps sometimes to be able to see it a little bit out of the box.
Yeah. If you do get stuck for ideas or where to start, thinking about the people involved is often quite helpful, I found. So in this as an example, the person discovering the bottle, they open the bottle, they read this letter. How do you want them to feel, right? So I think that's in one of the prompts there. How do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel surprised, scared, shocked, as I think somebody mentioned earlier on? Do you want them to feel inspired of, oh, I've got this message from the past because maybe this bottle's been in the sea for 30 years. And actually that's where this came from. What triggered this question, just for context, is this happened just a couple of weeks ago. A 9-year-old girl was on a beach in Hawaii and she found a bottle just like this. And it turns out that it had been released in Japan, just halfway across the Pacific Ocean from Hawaii, 30 years earlier, by school children as an experiment to monitor ocean currents. And lots of these bottles had since been found around Japan and other places, but this one hadn't been found in in years, actually. And they were surprised and shocked, but also quite pleasantly surprised that it had turned up all the way in Hawaii. And there was a message saying, we're from this school, please return us. So, you know, how did that 9-year-old feel discovering this and decoding the message and realizing it was from 30 years in the past from maybe another 9-year-old at the time who released it? Yeah. How do you want that person to feel? How do the people involved in this situation feel is a good thing to latch onto if you are struggling for ideas. And also I think it's quite nice because it demonstrates empathy, doesn't it? And kindness, and demonstrates that you're the kind of person who thinks about other people and their feelings.
All right, look at the next. I think we are almost.
Good ideas, guys.
Okay. And then I think this is the last one. I think the last one is general. General questions are asked to find out a little bit more. That's the entire reason they're asked. So I tend to ask them at the start of an interview. And the reason why I ask it is I like people to be comfortable when they're doing the interview, but also I like to know a little bit about them, because I then can talk a little bit later about some of the things that I've asked. So one of the ones that I've seen used with schools before is, what are you doing right now if you weren't doing this interview? And you might have been in school. So it might be something, you might have been in math, it might have been of history. But it gives me a little bit of insight, and it also allows an interviewer to be able to prompt. And that's what this kind of communication part is all about in KidCoachApp, is being able to have that forward and back conversation. And as I said the whole way through, it's all about communication with interviews, and being able to gauge somebody's passions and being able to have that conversation. And so tell me what you were doing if you weren't here right now, can give me often something that I can then go away and ask. So if they say, well, I'd be having art at this point, I can ask a whole load of prompts. Do you enjoy art? What did you do last lesson? What was your best thing that you've done in art? I can ask all sorts of questions. And that's kind of a bit like the prompts really with KidCoachApp. And what we're doing is initiating conversation. And really that's the whole point behind it, is to initiate that conversation. And that's why I like using them early in interviews, because I want my student to have a conversation with me. I don't just want it to be one-sided. Is there anything you want to say, Kavin, about the prompts that you put down?
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, this sounds like an earlier on question, even though we're covering it sort of last in the list of 5, as a general kind of get to know you type question. And again, taking us out of the interview context into real life, all this stuff carries forward. This is what you do when you meet somebody the first time. You'd ask them something to get to know them a little bit better. It might not be what will you do right now if we weren't having this coffee, but it might be, what did you do over the weekend, or something like that. This is stuff that you already will be doing with your friends, and you want to, the interviewer isn't a friend, but you want to be relaxed and friendly with them, and just have that open conversation where they can get to know you a little bit better. And I don't know if we're going to cover this, Jemma, but maybe even you can ask some questions as well, right? Because it's wise to ask some curious, well-chosen questions also, or maybe you're going to say that for the masterclass. But yeah, this general bit here is just about getting to know each other a little bit better. And if you're mentioning a couple of interesting things along the way, maybe that thing you did at the weekend, let's say, then it gives the interviewer something to come back and ask you a few more questions on, which is helpful, because probably that's something that you want and can talk about.
Definitely. Somebody's asked, how do you know when an interview is going well when you're not thinking about it going well? So typically, if you come out of an interview and it feels like you've just had a chat, albeit pressured chat, because there will be some nerves on the day, that is a great interview. If you feel like they've asked you loads and loads and loads of questions, and they've just asked loads of questions, and then it's probably that they're looking for you to elaborate a little bit more on your answers. That said, there are some interviewers who like to just ask questions. It is a style. It's not a style that typically schools will use, but some interviewers will just sit there and ask questions. Some as well, if you are preparing your child, they may have another person in the room who's just taking notes. That does happen, and it can be a little bit off-putting. So just to be aware that they might be just sitting there, and they might not ask anything, or they might move between the two. But typically, I'd say an interview is going well when you don't think about the interview and you don't think about the things you've prepared for it, and you don't do that kind of face where you're like, oh, what have I thought about? And you're not trying to remember the things you've pre-prepared. Those would be my points.
Yeah. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
So should we go to the wary of time as well?
Yes, I'm wary of time. Apologies. There are current affairs questions. I'm going to try and rush through this last part. They don't need to be technical. They just need to be something you can talk about. Don't talk about the economic climate if it's not something you're interested in. Tell me something that you read in the Week Junior. Tell me something that you read in Aquila magazine. Don't tell me something that you don't know anything about, because it's a discussion. So make sure you can discuss it beyond one line, I think, is probably the thing I want to say about current affairs.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Week Junior, great resource. Just watching the news generally, and for the families on this call, watching the news together, having a little chat afterwards. Simple questions, right? What do you think about that? What would you do in that situation? What do you think maybe they should do next? If you had to summarize the situation in 1 minute to your little brother who hasn't seen the news round, what would you say? Like, just these sorts of probing questions as you're watching the news together or reading the newspaper together, I think help get our kids' brains into current affairs so that we're able to talk about it confidently.
Yeah. I have seen occasionally where they've asked about COVID specific, but rarely will they ask about a news story specifically. If they are going to ask about a news story specifically, it will be a very, very popular one, so COVID, because they want to make sure that everyone has read it and everyone has an opinion on it. As I said, it's really rare that they do that without backing it up with something else. So without kind of bringing it in through a different discussion. So you would almost always have the option to present something that you found interesting, as opposed to be locked into a specific current affairs topic.
Awesome. So let's start wrapping up.
All right. Okay. Somebody has asked about note taking. It has been known that interviewers will note things down whilst you're talking. It has been known. It's not always, but sometimes it does happen. It really depends on the school, and it really depends on the interview style. But again, it's one of those things that if it happens, being prepared for the potential of it happening, it can help. So again, they're not writing down nasty things about you. They're writing down things that will help remember you when you're gone, so that they can go through. Often, a lot of schools ask for a little passport photo nowadays, and that will maybe be put as like part of kind of evidence, so that they can know who you are ultimately. Okay. Yeah, but
there is a question there as well, Jemma, about should children ask interviewer questions too, and if so, which ones?
Yep. So it is something I'm going to go over in the masterclass more, but yes, I would always have a prepared question, and that prepared question I would always pick to be a child's interest, so that they can demonstrate something that they are interested in.
Cool. So let's wrap up. And you mentioned that masterclass, right, Jemma? So what are ways to work with you if anybody's interested to continue getting your expert advice?
Of course. So we do 3 different ways in which we work with students for interview prep. And this is for 11 plus, 13 plus. interviews if your child is older, looking at university. We also do that, but different stuff. So interview masterclass is this Saturday at 9 until 11 a.m. It is recorded and it comes with a 50-page workbook. You actually saw a sample of some of the pages a little bit earlier in the slides. It's where I've got these question types from. I also do one-to-one mock interviews. They are with myself and they are booked at a time to suit you. They can be recorded. Some parents like to get the recordings back so that they can have a look at how their child does. There are 2 lots of 25-minute interviews and then we do a wrap-up session. And then I've put the 4-hour sessions down. I would honestly say that very few people need that. It's often used for students who really struggle, often with social cues, or who are struggling a little bit with kind of public speaking. So we do a 4-hour session. As I said, few people take it. Sounds like I'm almost doing myself out of a job, but I don't think you need that amount of preparation unless you have a child who's very nervous or has an SEN need that means that they want that additional support. To find out more, you can always drop us an email.
Awesome. And I put in the link, put in the chat, Jemma, the link to your interview masterclass. So it's great that you offer different levels of service, right? A little bit for people who need a little bit and more for people that need more. And in terms of working with me, download the KidCoachApp, download the KidCoachApp, download the KidCoachApp. It's super straightforward. It really is a quick download. It's quite a small app, so it takes no space on your phone, and you can get started for free within literally seconds. I've timed it, so I can say that it's literally seconds.
I have it on an iPad as well, so it doesn't have to be a phone.
Yeah. Although it's best on a phone, I would say it's been optimized for a phone because we know that parents, we're all so busy, aren't we? Hectic lives, and we always have our phone with us. iPad, maybe now, maybe sometimes, maybe not. So it's got hundreds and hundreds of questions in there. You saw some in the presentation earlier, and it's got lots of different coaching prompts as well. And that's probably the most interesting thing because you could Google a bunch of questions, couldn't you? But the coaching prompts are just there to help you push the thinking of your child a little bit more, to get beyond that 1-word answer, to make it from a 10-second conversation to a 3-minute conversation, which is more rich and engaging and is the kind of thing that an interviewer would want to see as well. So by all means, feel free to check out the KidCoachApp, and the links are also in the chat box. Awesome. Are there, if you need to go, please drop off because we've gone beyond 7, but Jemma and I can hang around for a little bit, I assume, Jemma, just in case there are any questions, any urgent questions from anybody about anything. Feel free to ask in the chat box. If there's something really burning that you're expecting us to cover, but we didn't, or just something that has been triggered in your mind based on all the amazing advice that Jemma has been going through, please let us know. But if not, do feel free to drop off. And thank you very much for giving up your what day is it? Wednesday evening a little bit to spend some time with us today. Yes, Abby, I'm sure you'll do great in your interview. All right, it doesn't look like there are any questions, just lots of thank you and thank you for a great session type comments. So, and most people have dropped off now. So I'll end this now, and thank you very much, Jemma.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
It all goes well this weekend. Yeah, of course.
It'll
go really well, I'm sure. We'll speak soon.
Perfect. All right then.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.